What drives a person to commit the unthinkable? Is it pure evil, a fractured psyche, or something even more sinister? Throughout history, some criminals have stood out not just for the horror of their crimes, but for the disturbing psychology behind them. These were not ordinary killers. They were masterminds of manipulation, deception, and violence. Figures whose minds continue to fascinate and terrify us. We take a psychological deep dive into the darkest corners of human nature. What made these criminals tick? What separated them from the rest of society? And what can we learn from the minds of history's most infamous killers? 1. Inside the twisted mind of Ted Bundy. Charm, intelligence, and a deadly secret. Ted Bundy was a master manipulator who hid his dark desires behind a carefully crafted mask. But what truly drove this man to commit some of the most brutal murders in history? In this deep psychological analysis, we break down the mind of one of the most notorious serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. To the outside world, Ted Bundy seemed like an ordinary, even charming man. Born in 1946, he was raised in what many considered a normal home. He was well-spoken, intelligent, and socially adept. He studied psychology at the University of Washington and later attempted law school. But beneath the surface, a monster was lurking. From an early age, Bundy displayed disturbing tendencies. He struggled with feelings of rejection and inadequacy, particularly after discovering that the woman he believed to be his sister was actually his mother. This revelation shattered his sense of identity, and some experts believe it contributed to his deep-seated rage. As he grew older, Bundy became increasingly obsessed with power and control. He was known to spy on neighbors, steal, and engage in deceptive behavior. But his true darkness would not fully emerge until the early 1970s. What makes a serial killer like Ted Bundy so terrifying isn't just his brutality, it's his ability to blend in. Bundy wasn't the typical monster people imagine. He didn't fit the stereotype of an unhinged maniac. Instead, he used charm as a weapon. Psychologists classify Bundy as a psychopath, lacking empathy, highly manipulative, and completely devoid of remorse. He had an uncanny ability to mimic normal human emotions, but they were never genuine. Bundy could feign kindness, confidence, and vulnerability, but it was all an act. One of Bundy's most disturbing traits was his ability to manipulate not just his victims, but also those around him, including friends, family, and even the media. He studied people carefully, knowing exactly how to make them trust him. The psychological control extended to his victims. Bundy's killing spree began in the early 1970s. He would often approach young women in public places, pretending to need help. Sometimes, he wore a fake cast or used crutches to appear vulnerable. Once the unsuspecting victim got close enough, he would strike, often knocking them unconscious before abducting them. His preferred victims were young, attractive, college-age women, many of whom resembled his ex-girlfriend, the woman who had once rejected him. Experts believe his killings were fueled by an insatiable need for dominance, revenge, and sexual sadism. He didn't just kill, he tortured. He would often revisit crime scenes, sometimes even engaging in necrophilia. His lack of remorse was chilling. When asked about his crimes, Bundy later admitted, "I don't feel guilty for anything. I feel sorry for people who feel guilt." Bundy's ability to manipulate extended far beyond his victims. It reached the police and even the legal system. He was first arrested in 1975, but due to a lack of solid evidence, he was able to escape justice for a while. Then, in a shocking display of arrogance, Bundy escaped from custody twice. His ability to outthink and outmaneuver the authorities showcases high intelligence and extreme narcissism. But his reign of terror would not last forever. In 1978, Bundy committed one of his most horrifying attacks, the brutal killings of multiple women, at the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida. This crime would be his downfall. He was arrested shortly after, and this time, there was no escape. Even in captivity, Bundy remained a master manipulator. He gave interviews, denied guilt, then later admitted to over 30 murders, though the true number is believed to be much higher. In his final days, Bundy attempted to place the blame on pornography, claiming it fueled his dark fantasies. But experts argue that Bundy's crimes were not caused by external influences. His darkness came from within. On January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Crowds outside cheered, celebrating the end of a monster. But even in death, his legacy of terror remains a haunting reminder of the evil that can hide behind a charming smile. Ted Bundy wasn't just a murderer. He was a symbol of how deceptive evil can be. His case changed how we understand serial killers, leading to major advancements in criminal profiling and forensic psychology. But his story also serves as a warning. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear a friendly face. 2. Inside the twisted mind of Jeffrey Dahmer. A killer with a chilling obsession, Jeffrey Dahmer's name is synonymous with horror. He didn't just kill, he mutilated, experimented, and consumed his victims. But what drove this man to commit such unimaginable acts? In this deep psychological analysis, we dive into the mind of one of history's most depraved serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer. Born in 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer had a childhood that seemed, at least on the surface, normal. But beneath the facade, there were early warning signs of a deeply disturbed mind. Dahmer was a quiet and withdrawn child, often showing little emotion. His parents' troubled marriage led to a sense of neglect, which some experts believe played a role in his psychological development. However, the most disturbing sign of his future crimes appeared in his fascination with dead animals. He would collect and dissect roadkill, fascinated by their insides. By his teenage years, Dahmer developed an obsession with control, particularly over people. He fantasized about having complete dominance over a person, someone who could never leave him. This desire for absolute power over another would later manifest in his murders. In 1978, at the age of 18, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. His victim was a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. The crime was not premeditated. Dahmer picked Hicks up, brought him home for drinks, and when Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell. But what came next was even more disturbing. After killing Hicks, Dahmer dismembered the body and dissolved parts of it in acid. For the first time, he had complete control over another human being. But after this initial murder, Dahmer would go nearly a decade without killing again. During this time, his inner demons festered. It wasn't until 1987 that Dahmer's killing spree truly began. He started frequenting gay bars and luring men back to his apartment under the pretense of casual encounters. But these meetings had a far darker purpose. Between 1987 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer killed 16 more men. His methods were as disturbing as his motives. He would drug his victims, strangle them, and then engage in post-mortem acts. But what truly set Dahmer apart was his grotesque obsession with preserving parts of his victims. Dahmer wasn't just a murderer. He was a necrophile and a cannibal. He would keep skulls, engage in sexual acts with corpses, and even consume parts of his victims. Why? Because he didn't want them to leave him. Eating them, in his mind, made them a permanent part of him. Perhaps the most shocking part of Dahmer's crimes was his attempt to create a zombie. He drilled holes into the skulls of some victims and injected acid or boiling water, hoping to render them mindless, living puppets. This twisted experiment revealed the true extent of his desire for absolute control. Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror came to an end in July 1991, when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and alert the police. What officers found inside Dahmer's apartment shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Human skulls, severed heads, photographs of mutilated victims. Dahmer had documented his atrocities in detail. His confession was just as chilling. He spoke calmly, detailing every crime as if recounting a mundane daily routine. Dahmer claimed he didn't kill out of anger or sadism, but rather out of a desperate need for companionship. He didn't want his victims to suffer. He just didn't want them to leave. This bizarre rationale is what makes his psychology so complex and terrifying. Sentenced to 16 life terms, Dahmer was sent to prison, where he initially showed little emotion about his fate. But as time passed, he seemed to undergo a transformation. He read the Bible, claimed to find religion, and even said he felt remorse. But was it real? Some believe Dahmer was truly remorseful in his final years. Others argue that his calm demeanor was simply another manipulation tactic. Regardless, his time in prison was short. short-lived. In 1994, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate. Some saw his death as justice. Others saw it as an easy way out. But one thing remains certain. Dahmer's crimes continue to haunt the world, a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath an ordinary face. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is one of the most disturbing in criminal history. His crimes were not driven by greed, revenge, or even rage, but by an uncontrollable need for control and possession. His case changed how we understand criminal psychology, particularly in cases involving necrophilia and extreme manipulation. But the most terrifying question remains: was Dahmer an anomaly, or are there others like him still out there? 3. Inside the twisted mind of Pablo Escobar. A man of extremes, Pablo Escobar was both a ruthless criminal and a self-proclaimed Robin Hood. He built an empire on blood money, controlled a nation through fear, and shaped the world of organized crime like no one before him. But what drove Escobar to become the most powerful drug lord in history? In this deep psychological analysis, we explore the mind of Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine. Born in 1949 in Colombia, Pablo Escobar came from humble beginnings. Raised in Medellin, he was ambitious from a young age, but his ambition came with a dangerous edge. He started with petty crimes, stealing tombstones, selling fake lottery tickets, and running small-scale scams. But Escobar had bigger dreams. By the 1970s, he found his way into the cocaine trade, just as demand in the United States was exploding. He quickly realized the potential for massive wealth and built a drug empire that would eventually control 80% of the global cocaine market. Escobar wasn't just a dealer. He was a businessman with a criminal genius. He established trafficking routes, bribed officials, and eliminated anyone who stood in his way. But what set him apart was his ability to balance extreme violence with strategic generosity. What made Escobar so dangerous was not just his wealth, but his psychology. Many experts believe he had strong narcissistic and psychopathic tendencies. He saw himself as a man above the law, a leader, a savior, even a god. Unlike traditional criminals, Escobar sought public approval. He built housing for the poor, funded hospitals, and even sponsored football teams. To many in Medellin, he wasn't a villain, he was a hero. This carefully crafted Robin Hood image made him untouchable for years. But his generosity was a facade, a calculated move to buy loyalty while ruling with an iron fist. Those who betrayed him met horrific fates. Escobar lived by a simple rule: plata o plomo, silver or lead, take the bribe or take the bullet. Escobar's rise to power was marked by unparalleled brutality. When the Colombian government threatened his empire, he responded with a reign of terror. He ordered the assassination of politicians, judges, and journalists. His cartel planted car bombs in cities, bringing Medellin to its knees. At the height of his power, Escobar even declared war on the Colombian state. His fear of extradition to the U.S. was his greatest weakness. He would rather die in Colombia than face justice in an American prison. This paranoia led him to kill thousands, including innocent civilians. Escobar's empire began to crumble in the early 1990s. With the U.S. and Colombian governments closing in, his enemies multiplied. Even his own allies turned against him. The formation of Los Peeps, an anti-Escobar death squad, led to the systematic elimination of his associates. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Forces provided intelligence to track his every move. The noose was tightening. On December 2, 1993, Pablo Escobar was finally cornered. After a dramatic rooftop chase, he was shot dead in Medellin. Some say it was a government kill shot. Others believe he took his own life. Either way, his reign was over. Even in death, Escobar's influence remains. His story inspired countless movies, TV shows, and even narco culture across the world. But his true legacy is one of devastation. His empire was built on bloodshed, corruption, and fear. While some still romanticize him, the truth is far darker. Escobar was not a hero. He was not a revolutionary. He was a predator, one who built a kingdom on destruction. The twisted mind of a drug lord. Pablo Escobar's psychology is a terrifying blend of ambition, ruthlessness, and delusion. He believed he was untouchable, a king among men. But in the end, like all tyrants, he fell. His story serves as both a warning and a reminder. Power built on violence never lasts. For inside the twisted mind of Ed Gein, a house of horrors, a mind twisted beyond comprehension, the name Ed Gein has become synonymous with some of the most disturbing crimes in history. His gruesome acts inspired some of Hollywood's most terrifying characters, from Norman Bates to Leatherface. But who was the man behind the legend? What drove Ed Gein to commit such nightmarish atrocities? Join us as we take a psychological deep dive into the mind of the Butcher of Plainfield, a childhood marked by isolation and obsession. To understand Ed Gein, we must go back to the very beginning. Born in 1906 in Plainfield, Wisconsin, he was raised in a strict, abusive household dominated by his mother, Augusta Gein. Augusta was a religious fanatic who instilled in Ed and his brother Henry a deep-seated fear of women and sin. She taught them that all women, except herself, were corrupt and evil. She controlled every aspect of Ed's life, ensuring that he remained emotionally and socially stunted. Ed worshipped his mother, but his brother Henry was not so easily manipulated. Tensions between the brothers grew, and in 1944, Henry was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially ruled as accidental, many believe Ed was responsible. If true, this could have been his first taste of murder. The death of Augusta and the breaking point. In 1945, Augusta suffered a stroke and passed away. This was the moment that changed everything. Without his mother's control, Ed Gein was truly alone for the first time in his life. Instead of moving on, Ed preserved parts of the home exactly as his mother left it. He sealed off her bedroom like a shrine. But something inside him snapped. His obsession with death and the female form took a horrifying turn. Grave robbing and the horrors within the farmhouse. With no family and no social life, Gein turned to the cemetery. He began exhuming bodies, selecting those that resembled his mother. What he did with them was beyond comprehension. Gein practiced taxidermy on human remains. He crafted masks, suits, and furniture from the skin and bones of the dead. His goal? To transform himself into a woman, specifically into his mother. His behavior went beyond the grotesque. It was ritualistic. Each piece he created was a tribute to Augusta, but grave robbing wasn't enough. Soon he needed fresh bodies. In 1957, Gein escalated to murder. His victim was Bernice Wardens, a local hardware store owner. When police arrived at Gein's farmhouse, they discovered a scene straight out of a nightmare. Human skulls, mutilated corpses, body parts turned into macabre decorations. Most shocking of all was a full bodysuit made entirely of female skin. When questioned, Gein admitted to exhuming corpses, but claimed he only killed two people, Bernice Wardens and tavern owner Mary Hogan. But his crimes were so grotesque that they still haunt popular culture to this day. The psychology of Ed Gein. Was Ed Gein a cold-blooded killer? Or was he mentally ill beyond rehabilitation? The answer lies in his psychological profile. Many believe Gein suffered from schizophrenia. He experienced auditory hallucinations, believing his mother was speaking to him even after her death. He also displayed extreme obsessive-compulsive tendencies, fixating on death, women, and transformation. Unlike other serial killers, Gein was not driven by sadism or a need for power. He wasn't a sexual predator. His crimes were deeply psychological, rooted in an unhealthy attachment to his mother and a warped perception of identity. Declared unfit for trial, Ed Gein was sent to a mental institution rather than prison. He lived out the rest of his days in a psychiatric hospital, showing little remorse for his actions. He was described as quiet, polite, even friendly. But beneath that mild demeanor lay a man who had committed some of the most grotesque crimes in history. The lasting horror of Ed Gein. Ed Gein's story is one that continues to terrify and fascinate. His crimes inspire horror films like Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. But beyond the Hollywood horror lies a real-life nightmare. A man consumed by loneliness, madness, and a disturbing L. 5. Inside the twisted mind of H.H. Holmes. He was America's first known serial killer, a man whose name became synonymous with deception, greed, and gruesome murder. H.H. Holmes, the mastermind behind the infamous murder castle, lured his victims into a labyrinth of death where they met their terrifying ends. But what kind of mind could create such horror? Join us as we unravel the twisted psychology of H. Holmes, the making of a murderer. Born as Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861, H. Holmes displayed troubling behaviors from an early age. Fascinated by death, he reportedly dissected small animals and had a disturbing lack of empathy. But what set him apart was his intelligence and charm, traits he would later use to manipulate and kill. Holmes pursued a medical degree, using it not to heal but to exploit. He stole cadavers, defrauded insurance companies, and honed his skills in deception. These early crimes were just the beginning. The Murder Castle, a house of horrors. In the late 1880s, Holmes arrived in Chicago and set his grand plan in motion. Under the guise of a hotel for the upcoming World's Fair, he constructed a building that would later be known as the Murder Castle. The building was a nightmare disguised as luxury. Hidden chambers, gaslit rooms, and soundproof torture spaces turned his hotel into a death trap. Victims checked in, but they never checked out. The psychology of a con man turned killer. Holmes was more than a murderer. He was a master manipulator. Unlike serial killers driven by impulse or rage, Holmes killed with precision and purpose. He saw murder as a business venture, eliminating anyone who got in his way. He lacked empathy but excelled in deception. He convinced investors, lured victims, and evaded capture for years. His ability to manipulate made him one of the most dangerous criminals in American history. The capture and confession. Holmes' greed was his downfall. His financial scams eventually caught the attention of authorities. As investigators close in, they uncover a horror beyond their imagination. Dozens of bodies were found, some burned, some dissolved in acid, others stripped to the bone. Holmes finally confessed, but with a flair for theatrics. He claimed to have killed 27 people, though some believe the true number could be much higher. The execution, an enduring legacy. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes was hanged for his crimes. But even in death, his legend endured. Stories of the Murder Castle, his confessions and possible undiscovered victims have kept his name alive for over a century. Conclusion: Holmes was the embodiment of evil wrapped in charisma. He killed not for passion, but for profit. He manipulated, deceived, and murdered without remorse. But what makes him truly terrifying is that he could have been anyone. Your doctor, your neighbor, your businessman. The question remains, how many more victims of H. Holmes remain undiscovered? These stories are more than just horrifying crimes. They are windows into the darkest aspect of human nature. What separates a serial killer from the rest of us? Is it upbringing, mental illness, or something lurking deep within the human psyche? While their names live on in infamy, their crimes remind us of a chilling reality. Evil can wear many faces. It can be charming, persuasive, even seemingly ordinary. But beneath the surface lies something unfathomable. Stay vigilant. Stay aware and never underestimate the depths of the human mind.